Silence, then breathing, wet, strained, the sound of air being pulled through destroyed lungs and forced through metal. November 25th, 1177. You're looking at a teenage boy who can barely close his fingers around leather reins. His hands are wrapped in linen bandages that were white this morning and are now stained a dark rust brown. Under those bandages, the flesh is decaying, bone visible in places. Leprosy doesn't just kill you. It erases you piece by piece while you're still alive. The silver mask covering his face isn't for decoration. It's required. What lies beneath would make hardened soldiers turn away. 3 miles ahead, the horizon is gone. 26,000 warriors, mounted cavalry stretching so far across the plain that their dust looks like fog rolling in from the sea. Banners of green, black, and gold snap in the wind like wings of hunting birds. The Sultan Saladin commands them, 40 years old, undefeated, confident enough that he's already sent messengers to Damascus describing tomorrow's victory feast. Behind the boy in the silver mask stand 500 knights. That's all. 500 exhausted men on worn-out horses, armor dented from a dozen earlier battles, holding lances with chipped points and swords overdue for sharpening. The math is simple: 52 enemies for every Christian soldier. Odds so impossible they barely deserve discussion. You don't fight that, you surrender, or you die. Every advisor told him to stay behind Jerusalem's walls. Every military manual ever written says charging is suicide. Even his own body, nerves destroyed by disease, joints swollen and skin splitting, is begging him to stop. Baldwin Roman IV does the impossible. He orders the charge. What happens over the next 3 hours will break the minds of everyone who tries to explain it. Christian chroniclers call it divine intervention. Muslim historians call it a disaster sent by God as punishment. Modern analysts will study it for centuries and still struggle to make the numbers add up. But here's what nobody tells you about Montgisard. The battle was lost before the first lance dropped. Saladin made no mistakes. His army was rested, well supplied, positioned on perfect terrain for cavalry. His commanders were veterans. His warriors were elite Mamluks, slave soldiers trained from childhood to kill. The Crusaders were outnumbered 52 to 1. So how did 20,000 of Islam's finest fighters end up dead in a single afternoon? The answer isn't what you think. And it begins with a choice Saladin made 3 days earlier. One so logical, so obviously correct, that it destroyed everything he'd built. Before we watch history fall apart, a quick note. If you're the kind of person who gets pulled into these real moments from the past, the ones textbooks somehow make boring, scribing helps us dig deeper into the archives to uncover more of them. Back to November 1177, and the most dangerous man in the Holy Land is about to make his first mistake. Jerusalem in 1177 isn't the shining city from psalms or paintings. It's a body pretending to breathe. Walls cracked from 80 years of siege, half-empty streets because anyone with sense fled months ago. The holiest city in Christendom, defended by fewer soldiers than a modern high school, has students. The kingdom is held together by scar tissue and denial. And on the throne sits a 16-year-old boy whose own flesh is turning against him. Baldwin Roman IV wasn't supposed to be king. He wasn't even supposed to be alive. Leprosy in the 12th century isn't just an illness. It's a divine curse made visible. Lepers ring bells to warn people they're coming. They're buried in unmarked graves, erased from family records, treated as if they died the moment the first white patch appeared. But Baldwin's father, King Amalric, saw something in his son that the disease couldn't touch: intelligence, clarity, a mind that sliced through problems like a blade through silk. So when Amalric died suddenly in 1174, the crown went to a 13-year-old boy who would never marry, never have children, and whose kingdom was already being measured for a coffin. Facing this dying kingdom is Saladin. Born Yusuf ibn Ayyub, he rose from commander to sultan through tactical brilliance Machiavelli would envy. By 1177, he accomplished what generations failed to do, uniting Egypt and Syria under one banner, one mission: reclaim Jerusalem. At 40, he's at the height of his power, backed by Egypt's wealth, fighters from across the region, and siege machines that crack fortresses like eggs. And here's what should scare you: Saladin isn't a monster. He's devout, diplomatic, respected even by his foes. He follows the rules of war, but rules don't matter when annihilation is on the table. By autumn 1177, Europe has stopped sending help. They've written off Jerusalem. Even the Pope is quietly negotiating what happens after it falls. If this moment doesn't make you realize how close the world came to shifting because of a dying teenager and 500 desperate men, you're missing the lesson our ancestors died trying to teach. The world doesn't care about your odds. It cares about your will. There's something else about Baldwin that chroniclers mention only briefly, almost embarrassed. He smiled before battle, not some nervous flex, real anticipation. A leper king whose nerves were so dead he couldn't feel pain. A boy with nothing left to lose, grinning behind a silver mask as armies 20 times his size gathered on the horizon. Think about that. Pain is your warning system. It tells you to stop, to turn back. Baldwin's warning system was gone. He could push past limits that would break another man, and he wouldn't know until something literally tore apart. Saladin, for all his brilliance, never grasped what that meant. But he was about to learn. November 23rd, 1177. Saladin's army pours into Crusader territory like a dam bursting. 26,000 mounted warriors. The supply train alone stretches for miles. Tents, food, siege engines, mobile forges for repairing weapons. This isn't a raid. It's an invasion meant to erase the Crusader states for good. A Muslim chronicler writes, "The banners of the faithful covered the hills like stars fallen to earth. The hoofbeats thundered without end. Saladin's strategy is textbook perfect. Bypass the fortress of Ascalon. It's fortified and manned. Why waste time on a siege? Sweep north along the coast, cut Jerusalem off from the sea, strangle its supplies, and wait for hunger and infighting to finish the job." He's done this before. It always works. Inside Jerusalem, the situation isn't desperate. It's mathematically impossible. Baldwin's remaining advisors, the few nobles who haven't fled, lay out the numbers in the throne room. City garrison, about 750 men, mostly infantry. Available knights, maybe 500 if they call in every favor. Templar reinforcements, 80 warrior monks already worn down from trying to hold border castles against Saladin's 26,000. Raymond of Tripoli, one of the kingdom's most experienced leaders, says it bluntly: "Sire, we should negotiate while we still have something to offer. If we ride out, we die. And if we die, the kingdom dies with us." The room goes silent. Baldwin slumps on his throne. Standing for more than a few minutes makes his joints swell and crack. His advisors can see him shaking from the effort of staying upright. They know what he's considering. If he stays behind Jerusalem's walls, the city might hold for weeks, maybe months if they ration carefully. But Saladin will burn every village, every farm, every church within 50 miles. The civilians will suffer slowly. Horribly, if he rides out with 500 knights, they die fast. But if Saladin's army is busy cutting down knights in the open, they might not have time to burn the countryside. The peasants might survive long enough for help to arrive from Europe. It's not a choice between victory and defeat, it's between dying with purpose or dying slowly while watching everyone else suffer first. Baldwin lifts his head. The silver mask catches the torchlight. "Raymond, how fast can Saladin move when he's spread out foraging?" The question confuses the room. Raymond frowns. "Slower than usual, sire. They'll need time to reform ranks." Baldwin leans in. "If we hit them while they're scattered." The room goes cold. "My lord," Raymond says, gesturing at Baldwin's bandaged hands and wasted frame, "you can barely mount a horse without help. Your hands can't hold reins." "That's all I need them to do," Baldwin answers. What happens next is recorded by Christian and Muslim sources alike. because it's so insane no one believes it until enemy chroniclers confirm every detail. On November 24th, Baldwin Roman IV, carried on a litter because his legs can't manage palace stairs, is taken to the royal armory. Knights strap on his armor. His fingers won't close properly. They tie the sword to his wrist with leather. He orders every available man to prepare to march. 500 knights, 80 Templars, 30 infantry, moving north towards Saladin. Odo of Santa, the Templar Grandmaster, a scarred veteran of a dozen battles, actually weeps when Baldwin is lifted onto his warhorse. The king has to be strapped to the saddle. His legs can't grip. They march at night, 45 miles in 36 hours. For context, that pace would exhaust healthy cavalry in good weather. For men carrying a dying king toward almost certain death, it borders on impossible. As they ride, Baldwin keeps asking his scouts the same question. Is Saladin still moving north? Yes, sire. Is his army still spread out? Yes, sire. Each time Baldwin, feverish and held upright in his saddle by sheer will, smiles beneath his mask. The knights assume it's delirium, fever dreams, a mind breaking under pressure. They're wrong. Baldwin has seen something. He's read a pattern in Saladin's movements nobody else noticed. He's counting on Saladin making the logical choice, the one that will undo him. November 25th dawns over ground that will be soaked in blood by sunset. Saladin gets his first warning just after sunrise. A scout arrives, horse foaming. My lord crew, Seder banners on the ridge. Saladin barely looks up from breakfast. A patrol. They'll withdraw when they see our numbers. The scout's voice wavers. There are hundreds, maybe thousands. Saladin looks up and, for the first time in his career, realizes he's made a mistake. His army, confident, undisciplined after days of easy marching, spread over 3 miles looting and resting horses, is caught unprepared. Worse, standing on the ridge, silhouetted by the rising sun, is a figure in armor topped with a silver mask that gleams like a second sunrise. One of Saladin's commanders whispers, "Is that the leper king?" Saladin stares, then quietly, "God help us, he came." What Saladin doesn't grasp, what no one but Baldwin understands, is this won't be decided by numbers, steel, or tactics. It will be decided by pain, or rather by the inability to feel it, by 2 p.m. On November 25th, the air smells of sweat and fear. Baldwin's 500 knights form a wedge at the tip. 80 Templars in white surcoats with red crosses, warrior monks who vowed never to retreat, hold the point. Behind them are exhausted secular knights who said goodbye to their families the day before, certain they'd never return. Strapped to his horse like a corpse, Baldwin Roman IV is at the front. His advisors scream one last time, "Sire, we can still fall back." Regroup at. Baldwin raises his bandaged right hand. The gesture seems impossible. His fingers hardly work, but somehow he lifts it for 500 men to see and drops it forward, the signal to charge. You're one of those knights in that moment about to charge 6,000 warriors, 52 enemies for every one of you. The math of your death is already written. You'll be called brave, maybe, but mostly you'll be dead. Leading you is a 16-year-old whose flesh is rotting, who needs straps to stay upright, who should be in a monastery, not on a battlefield. Then you see something that changes everything. As the charge begins, the ground starts to shake, 500 horses surging, and Baldwin leans forward in his saddle. You can't see his face, but you know he's smiling. If he isn't afraid to die, why are you? At 400 yards, Saladin's scattered forces scramble to form lines. Too slow. At 300 yards, archers fire. Arrows fall like black rain. Knights and horses go down, but the charge doesn't stop. At 200 yards, Saladin shouts orders. His elite Mamluks, 8,000 slave soldiers trained from childhood to kill, try to form ranks. They are terrified, not of numbers, but of the madness charging at them. At 100 yards, Baldwin does something no chronicler can explain. He draws his sword. His hands shouldn't work. The blade is tied to his wrist. He lifts it above his head. 500 knights see their dying king holding steel to the sky and scream, not a battle cry, but a raw sound of fury, grief, and faith combined. At 50 yards, Muslim horses start to back away. Animals know. At 10 yards, frontline Muslim soldiers drop weapons and flee. At 2:15 p.m., the Templar wedge smashes into Saladin's center like a fist through paper. The noise isn't a clean metallic ring. It's wet, crunching, full of screams, horses and men. In the first 30 seconds, 300 Mamluks simply stop existing. Trampled, skewered, crushed under armored riders charging at full gallop. Then the impossible happens. The charge doesn't stop. Cavalry tactics call for striking hard, wheeling away, regrouping. The Templars keep going, driving through the Muslim center like a knife through flesh. Baldwin's secular knights flood the gap, widening it into a wound that won't close. By 2:30 p.m., Saladin's center 8-0. 0-0 warriors who'd never lost. Breaks, not an organized retreat. A collapse. Men fling down weapons, tear off armor because it's too heavy to run in, trample each other in panic to escape the white and red crosses that just keep coming. Saladin screams orders of reform, reform, and no one listens. That dying boy on the horse seems to cut through ranks like he can see the future. His knights follow him as if he's opened a road straight to paradise. Wherever the silver mask turns, Muslim warriors flee. The ravines across the plain, features Saladin hadn't scouted because he assumed he'd never need to retreat, funnel the fleeing into natural kill boxes. Knights pursue, and suddenly thousands are trapped in narrow canyons with steep walls, trampling and suffocating in panic. A Christian chronicler will later write, the ravines filled with bodies like wells filling with water, until the dead made bridges for the dying to cross. A Muslim historian will confirm it. We fled into the earth's mouth, and the earth devoured us. At 3 p.m., Saladin's personal guard, 2,000 of the finest warriors, sees the Templars and runs. Saladin, abandoned and surrounded, does the only thing left. He grabs a racing camel and flees. The undefeated Sultan of Egypt and Syria, who commanded 26,000 that morning, runs for his life. By 4 p.m., it's over. 20,000 Muslim warriors lie dead or dying across 3 miles of blood-soaked earth. Another 6,000 scatter into the desert, abandoning weapons, armor, and supplies. Of Baldwin's roughly 500 men who fought, a heavy number are dead. Loss is severe, but they've won the day. When they pull Baldwin from his horse, he's unconscious. The straps are the only reason he didn't fall during the fight. His bandages are soaked with blood, wounds torn open by the sheer physical strain of wielding a sword his hands shouldn't have held. The knights think he's dead. Odo of Santa checks for breath and finds it, barely. He weeps openly and tells the men he couldn't feel pain. That's how he did it. He couldn't feel his body breaking, so he never stopped. They never knew to stop. You've just watched 500 men defeat 26,000, not by strength, equipment, or numbers, but because they followed a boy who'd already lost everything except his will. If that doesn't remind you how much one moment, one decision, one person can change everything, you're not paying attention to the lesson written in blood across that field. Subscribe to Bloodstone Histories. These aren't just stories. They're warnings about what happens when human will collides with human calculation. But here's what no one tells you about Montgisard. Saladin didn't stay beaten, and Baldwin, though victorious on the field, lost something far worse. The night after Montgisard, Jerusalem burns candles in every window and church bells ring for 72 hours. Priests call it a miracle. Peasants who'd been packing to flee dance in the streets. Baldwin Roman IV is hailed as a second Judas Maccabeus, the warrior who saved his people against impossible odds. In the royal chamber, however, physicians argue over whether to amputate. The stress of the battle accelerated Baldwin's leprosy catastrophically. Tissue that was only damaged before is now necrotic. Infection spreads through flesh that can't heal. His hands, the same hands that somehow gripped a sword for 3 hours, are swollen to twice their size, leaking pus through the bandages. He's 16 years old, and his body is dying faster now because of what he did to save his kingdom. The material gains from Montgisard are staggering. Saladin abandoned his entire supply train, hence weapons, food for 26,000 men, and chests of gold. Overnight, all of it becomes Crusader property. The Templars alone seize enough equipment to arm every Christian fortress in the Levant. Saladin's war chest, literal tons of gold meant to pay his soldiers for the siege of Jerusalem, now funds the Crusader kingdom for 2 years. Castles that had been preparing surrender terms suddenly rebuild their defenses. European rulers who had written off Jerusalem begin sending reinforcements. For the first time in decades, the Crusader states aren't just surviving, they're winning. But in Cairo and Damascus, the loss is devastating. Saladin's reputation, built over 15 years of careful conquest and diplomacy, shatters overnight. Muslim chroniclers struggle to explain it. How does the sword of Islam lose 20,000 warriors to 500 knights? Ibn al-Athir writes, "This was the most terrible catastrophe to befall the believers in this age." Another chronicler is even more blunt. "God turned his face from us that day. The real damage isn't military, it's psychological." Saladin had united the fractured Muslim world under one promise: inevitable victory. One march, one battle, and Jerusalem would return to Islamic rule. Now, Egyptian emirs quietly explore separate peace deals. Syrian lords question whether Saladin is truly God's chosen instrument or just a man who got lucky, until he didn't. It takes Saladin 10 years to rebuild what Baldwin destroyed in 3 hours. 10 years. But here's the part that should haunt you. Baldwin's doctors tell him he has maybe 6 months to live, a year at most. The disease is too advanced. The battle pushed his body beyond recovery. He survives 8 more years, 8 years of increasing agony, losing his sight, losing mobility, eventually unable to hold a pen or feed himself. But his mind stays razor sharp. And during those 8 years, he defends Jerusalem against Saladin 3 more times. Never with more than 1,000 knights, never losing. There's a moment in 1183, 6 years after Montgisard, when Baldwin and Saladin meet under a truce flag to negotiate a prisoner exchange. Baldwin is carried on a litter. He's blind now, unable to walk, barely able to whisper. Saladin looks at this broken boy who has haunted him for years and says something Muslim chroniclers preserve word for word. "I do not understand how God could give such a mind to such a body." Baldwin whispers back through a translator, "Perhaps so that when I win, no one can claim it was by strength alone." Saladin rides away in silence, and here's the twist that reframes everything. When Baldwin Roman IV finally dies in 1185 at age 24, body destroyed, legacy unshakable, Saladin waits exactly 2 years. Then he conquers Jerusalem. Without Baldwin, the Crusader states collapse in months. The kingdom he saved with 500 knights at Montgisard crumbles without him, because he was the kingdom. His successors lose in a few years what Baldwin held together for 8. So did he win, or just delay the inevitable? Montgisard teaches something that terrifies military historians. Numbers don't matter nearly as much as we think. The Pentagon has entire departments calculating force ratios, logistics, probabilities. We build civilizations on the assumption that more is better, that math dictates outcomes. And then November 25th, 1177 happens. 500 against 26,000. And the 500 win. Not because of better equipment. They didn't have it. Not because of a better position, though Baldwin used it brilliantly. Not even because of superior tactics, though his were sharp enough to study today. They won because one dying boy refused to accept that numbers decide fate. Baldwin Roman IV understood something we've forgotten. Human will, pushed beyond self-preservation, freed from fear because pain no longer registers, becomes a force math cannot measure. He couldn't feel his body breaking, so he never knew when to stop. And the 500 men who watched their king fight with a body that should have collapsed hours earlier decided that if he wouldn't quit, neither would they. We live in an era obsessed with probabilities. Algorithms tell us what stocks to buy. Polls predict elections before votes are counted. Models forecast wars using GDP and troop numbers. Maybe we've lost something important in all that calculation. The understanding that history pivots on people who refuse to accept the math. When 500 become more dangerous than 26,000 because the 500 believe in something the 26,000 don't. There's a letter Baldwin wrote to his sister Sibylla shortly before his death. It's kept in the Vatican archives, yellowed and fragile. In it he writes, "I was told I would die young, they were right. I was told I would die a leper, they were right. I was told I could not rule, they were wrong. Perhaps God gives us diseases to show us that flesh is temporary, but will is eternal." He ends with, "My hand stopped working years ago, but my kingdom still stands." By the time Sibylla received that letter, Baldwin was already dead. 2 years later, the kingdom fell, but for 8 years that shouldn't have been possible. One dying boy held back an empire. You've just witnessed one of history's most fragile victories. A moment when everything, the kingdom, the faith, the lives of thousands, balanced on the will of a teenager whose body was falling apart. If stories like this remind you how delicate civilization is, how close we always are to losing everything, how much one person's refusal to quit can reshape the world, subscribe to Bloodstone Histories, because the past isn't dead, it's waiting for someone to remember. And if you think Baldwin's story is dark, wait until you hear what we uncovered next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next